Hi everyone, welcome to the Teach Middle East podcast. My name is Lisa Grace. Today I have Ger Graus and he is going to be talking to us a little bit about a topic that is very, very dear and near to my heart as a former classroom teacher, now parent. And we want to dive into class sizes. Is bigger bad? Is bigger better? Does it really matter? What really matters when it comes to class sizes?
You are listening to the Teach Middle East podcast, connecting, developing, and empowering educators.
Ger, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I like to dive straight in, but for you, I would love an introduction so people can get to know a little bit about you.
Oh, where do you want me to start? So I grew up in the south of the Netherlands, went to school, went to university, became a teacher, moved to England for 1 year only in 1983, and I'm about to enter the Guinness Book of Records because it's about to become the longest year ever, I think, because 40 odd years later, I'm still here. I'm originally a secondary school teacher of German, then did the traditional thing, became a head of faculty, became an advisor, then joined the dark side, became an inspector and a senior inspector, became Anakin Skywalker again as education director, and then in the late 1990s, early 2000s, left that field of formal and increasingly formal schooling, teach and test, and started to work in a sphere of learning outside the classroom. I founded the Children's University as a charity, which went global and then became the first global education director for Kidzania, as in how do you make education play and how do you make play educational and what can we learn from that. And since then, I speak at conferences, I participate in podcasts and write articles as part of research around what education of today should really look like.
Brilliant. That's a great introduction. Ger wrote and still writes for Teach Middle East. And one of the reasons why we're on this podcast today is because he's recently written an article about class sizes, which we're going to unpack on this episode of the podcast, because Ger makes the point that we don't need to always think that big class sizes are bad. He's about to bust the myth that big classes are bad. So in your article, Ger, you reference, different periods and some finding a minor improvement in test scores with smaller class sizes. But how do you recommend educators and policymakers balance the academic research with the practical considerations when making decisions about class sizes? That's a mouthful.
I think it's an odd measuring thing. Before I go into that, I'd just like to quote Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, writer of The Little Prince, my all-time favorite book. And in that book, he says, all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. And I just throughout, I'd like us to hang on to this because I don't understand sometimes where this big class size thing is bad thing comes from. If I go back in time to when I was a child, a pupil, a student, and I talk to many of my friends and acquaintances all over the world about this, and my question to them is, do you have any recollection from your own childhood where you sat down at some point and thought, this class size is too big, I'm suffering here? And nobody can. Right, so that's an interesting thing. There's nobody I've met who said that yet. And I'm not quite understanding sometimes where that so-called measure comes from. I think it's certainly used politically. Yeah, in the UK, for example, political parties will go, "Oh, but your class sizes were bigger than my class sizes," and that's then used as a bad thing. I'm much more concerned about quality because I promise you one thing: you can have the smallest class size and a teacher who's no good, you ain't going anywhere. And you can have a big class size and a teacher who's brilliant and you are going places. So first of all, I'd like us to move away in our thinking of numbers, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, whatever you want. And I'd like us to move to different numbers. And those numbers are about contact. So for example, a really easy sum would be, I'm going to stick 30 11-year-olds in one room. We call it a classroom, but I have 3 adults in that room. And all of a sudden, I'm starting to create the best of both worlds because where necessary, I am 1 to 10. And where necessary, I can be 3 to 30. So it allows me better learning dynamics, and it allows me to create those learning dynamics. Of course, the same thing still applies, doesn't it? If I have 3 brilliant teachers in a classroom, I'm flying. And if I have 3 bad teachers in a classroom, I won't take off. So I think we need to be slightly more realistic, feet on the ground, honest about what we're actually talking about. That first and foremost. And after that, it is always about the quality. It is always about the awe and wonder. It is always about the experience. And I would much rather work with teachers for whom the world is the classroom, because that's the other thing. Why are we obsessed with being in a classroom when I can go online and I'm everywhere, or I can go to all the amazing cultural places in the Middle East and elsewhere that are also classrooms? I mean, I remember my first ever visit to the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, and I was just completely and utterly blown away. It's a better classroom than the classroom in the school. So we need to think differently.
I'm curious, though. Is there no point at which it's too big a class for, say, for example, 11-year-olds to actually thrive? Is there no cutoff point? Is there a cutoff point?
I think there's a practical, there are cutoff points, right? And forgive me if I sound flippant. I'm not. So I can't put, for health and safety reasons, I can't put 100 children in a room where I'm only allowed to put in 30. So I think there are really practical measures where there are, of course, cutoff points, right? I'd like to go back to that issue. I think there are optimum relationships in contact points. Yeah. So let's just say, again, you have 30 in a classroom. Each one of those youngsters learns differently, of course, because that's why we're individual. And that's why we talk about personalization a lot. And I have 4 adults in that classroom. And it functions. It functions because they're brilliant teachers, because they've got the youngsters are engaged. There's a lot of noise. Everybody is happy and smiley and learning. But actually, I, as the pupil, sometimes I prefer to learn in a quieter space. And there are a couple of us who prefer to learn in a quieter space. I have the flexibility for one of those adults, those brilliant teachers, to take the ones who prefer a bit of peace and quiet occasionally out of that room into another room called a library or resource center, whatever it's called these days, or even outside, and learn differently. So if I have one teacher on a class of 15, I can't do that. It's about contact, flexibility, and molding that to the needs of the youngsters. This thing about class sizes, as we talk about it in general, is almost like a value for money judgment. Sometimes it feels like a commercial kind of judgment that goes, there's more than 30 in that room. It's bad. We really need to be a bit more intelligent about that, I think. And to go back to my friend Antoine, we need to remember that we were all little ones and that we all learn differently. So you could have, if your room is big enough and it's nicely air conditioned and we are comfortable. So if the environment is conducive to learning, you can have 75 in a classroom, as long as I've got 7.5 adults, or let's make it 8 adults in there, right? Or 10 adults or whatever. So that flexibility. Because the other nice thing about the learning side of it is that if I have 3 or 4 adults in a room, just for argument's sake, as the youngster, I can also find the one that suits me best. Because learning is about relationships. If the relationship is brilliant, it kind of works better. So I think it's a lot of fuss about nothing. If it comes to the point whereby it does become an exercise that is monetary driven, because we have to remember, of course, that we are also in a world, rightly or wrongly, where schools have a business element to them. Yeah? They are sometimes, if you have a private school group, they are commercial entities to a degree. If those decisions are made on commercial grounds, and it is 1 adult per 30 or 1 adult per 20, I think that's a different discussion. So my argument as the parent with the school would be, I've got nothing against big class sizes. Brilliant. I think I can see all the advantages of it. How many brilliant teachers are with the youngsters in that big class? It's a different argument. It's a quality argument rather than a numbers argument.
I'm hearing you. So optimally, you ought to have more adults to the number of students in the classroom. So it's not about the number of students. If logistically the classroom can hold 35 students, then it's fine for all 35 of them to be in there, as long as there are enough adults in there of quality teachers who can then help them to learn and progress. Question, what's the optimal number of teacher to student, do you think then?
That's a very good question. Can I just say one thing first as well? I think if we have 35 in a classroom, let's just for argument's sake say, I have 35 in a classroom with 5 adults. I would prefer to have 35 in a classroom with 5 brilliant adults than 7 in 5 classrooms with 1 adult each. Right? I think that the 35 is a good thing. The question as to how many adults per youngster and what's optimum it's quite simple, really. And the answer is it depends. Now, let me give you the example, okay? So if I come to give a lecture, if I'm here to pass on knowledge for 40 minutes, and all I want is for the young people to remember what I've said so that I can test them what they've remembered, which is what a lot of the schooling is about. I don't know, 1 to 100. Because actually what you are delivering, to all intents and purposes, and forgive me for being slightly facetious, but what you are delivering to all intents and purposes is a lecture. I'm not interacting. I'm not expecting any answers back. I'm passing on the knowledge. If I'm talking about learning and interacting with a group of 35, bearing in mind that each one of those children is different. Yeah? There are boys and girls, and some are geniuses and others take a bit longer, and there's all those bits. It becomes more complex, but also more fun. So let's just say that we have, in a class of 35, let's say that we have 5 adults, 4, whatever, you take your pick, somewhere in that region, okay, 3 even. But then it becomes a different question. The question also that we need to look at in education in 2024, in schooling in 2024, is who is the teacher, okay? Now, let me give you an example. And there's a little bit of Kidzania will come out, okay? So if I'm the careers educator, I'm the careers teacher. For argument's sake, I've got 35 in a room, and there's another 2 careers teachers with me in that room, and all 3 of us are brilliant. We're the best in the business. I want more adults in the room. At that moment in time for that subject, I want more adults in the room. I want at least, as one of the 3, I want at least another 5 adults just with me, because today's topic is the airline industry. We're looking at that career aspect. And actually, I'd quite like a pilot in with me, and I'd like cabin crew in with me, and I'd like an engineer in with me, and I'd like the person who prepares the food in with me, and somebody else. Because I can read from the book and tell them what a pilot does. But for that moment in time, for that lesson, I'd like the pilot to be a co-teacher. So the answer is how many adults per youngster. It depends what we're doing with them, right? But I think, in ideal terms, and there'll be all sorts of research around this. And of course, please remember the different learning styles of the youngsters. If I look at my 3 children, very different. My son was a self-learner, really, and it didn't really matter to him. And he's very bright, and much brighter than I am. And so he just did it on his own most of it. And he was stimulated by all sorts of things. Both my girls, slightly different. They needed the interaction. It sparked them, the whole interaction thing, just made them go boom. And so there is an issue around, but you'd have to say, on the complexity of the youngsters in front of you, in a, say, mixed ability class, in an ideal world, if money were no object, you wouldn't want to go over a dozen to 15, really. I think 15 would be pushing it for one teacher, if you want to give them the attention that they truly individually merit and need. Okay? Now, I understand there are all sorts of things. There will be head teachers listening to this and school owners going, oh my God, we're going to go bust and this, that, and the other. But I think there is if you look at it from the child's point of view, and that's what school is about. In the end, school is not about statistics and how many top grades did we get. The issue for the school is, did we manage to work with that individual child for him or her to reach his or her potential? That's the measure. Yeah? And that requires attention and time. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to say 1 to a dozen, but no more.
Right. You heard that, people. Ger said 1 adult to 12 children is what would potentially be ideal. But I want to pull you back on something. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about, you said, I would rather have 5 teachers with 35 students, then have them separated off, as in 7 students with 1. What are the advantages of having all the students together in a larger group?
So I'm
for the students.
Yeah. So and for the teachers, because teachers working together become better teachers. I'm very fortunate that I've met lots of people in my life, and I am now working with a very close friend of mine, Carla Rinaldi, who is the president of the Fondazione Reggio Children, the global experts on early years education based in northern Italy. And they have some very interesting research and some very interesting conclusions from that research. And I would say their headline for me is that there are 3 teachers. The adults as teachers, not necessarily just qualified teachers. The parents are also teachers. We are all educated. So the adults, the children learn from each other. And thirdly, the environment. We learn differently in different environments. And if I were a principal of a school, I would focus very heavily on which environment my children learn in. So I mentioned a minute ago as an example that in today's careers education lesson, we're dealing with the topic of the flight industry, the aviation industry. I should go to the airport to teach that lesson, shouldn't I really, rather than sit in a classroom?
Ideally.
So why don't we try? And if we can't do it for real all the time, are there alternatives that we can seek online so that at least we are virtually closely connected to the topic that we're trying to learn? So that there are 3 teachers, essentially. Now, given that the environment we're in is the classroom today, we need to make sure that the classroom is a conducive environment for learning. So I'd like to see lots of appropriate displays and books and all sorts of resources available for the children to use, first and foremost. Secondly, teachers who work together produce better outcomes. It's a fact of life, isn't it? I would say in most professions, if you get brilliance in a room, it produces greater brilliance.
True.
And of course, the same applies to children. Watching groups of children, larger groups of children work together, we seem to be born as human beings with an enormous degree of empathy. And then schools, at times, I think, try to teach the empathy out of kids, instead of utilizing it. Children as teachers and children as better learners because they collaborate is brilliant. It comes naturally. The bigger the group, within reason, the bigger the group, the more opportunity there is to productively and constructively collaborate and cooperate. The smaller the group, because what do we do when we get small groups in schools? We've labeled the children, and the smaller groups become boxes. Yeah? They're good at something, they're not so good at something. It's this and that, A, B, C. We call them all sorts of things. And actually, I think we need to bring the youngsters together so that they can learn from each other, construct their learning from what they've been taught, and work across with those teachers. I would not like my children to have been in classes of 7. It's not the school I would have sent my children to.
A lot of parents seem to value class sizes. It is an advertising point for schools out here. Small class sizes, more attention, etc., etc. But what you said made so much sense. There are 3 teachers. There's the environment, there's the teachers themselves, and there are the other students where they learn from each other. I absolutely think that is spot on. You said something that was pivotal, though. You talked about the role of quality teachers. You said that was the deciding factor. How do we identify these quality teachers? Elaborate for me. Not only how do we identify them, but how do we develop them?
Well, it's a very interesting point, and it's a global issue, right? And I wanted to mention a number of points there, really, I think. So one is we should shop around a little bit. Yeah, there are different societies on our planet, and in those different societies, schooling and education and those who are professionally engaged with it are treated and viewed differently. So if you go to some of the Scandinavian countries, Finland is hailed as such. The area in Reggio Emilia, northern Italy, it would be another. You have highly qualified people who become teachers. They are well remunerated and their working conditions are positive. They are highly respected by society. Incidentally, those things you can't do them overnight, right? This is a cultural thing. They also continually invest in the development of teachers, okay? Like happens in other walks of life. If you do that over a period of time with governmental support, with support from industry, it's a collaborative exercise. If you do that over a period of time, then after a generation, you may well be part of a society that functions like that. If you think that what we've got wrong for the last 100 years, we can fix in 2 or the lifetime of a parliament, and you are sadly mistaken. This will take time. We actually want to come to the point where people want to become teachers. It's a highly valued profession. And I do some work with the university here in the United Kingdom. And I was very privileged to give a keynote address to 200 PGCE students, people who it was on their very first day that they entered their course to become a teacher. So I went to see them all. And I congratulated them and basically said, this is amazing that you want to do this. And my job, I suppose, was to fire them up for their second day. And one of them asked me a question at the end and said, so you firmly believe that the teaching profession should be the equivalent in standing to that of doctors and lawyers? And my answer was no. I think the teaching profession should stand higher than that, because without the teaching profession, there wouldn't be any doctors or lawyers. And for some reason, and this is much to do with society over a period of time, but it is also much to do with parents and parental attitudes. These people are experts. They're experts in what they do. They're not all equally 100%. You don't get that anywhere. Our job is, as governments and as societies, to enable the teachers to become better. And quite frankly, also to identify those who are not quite as good and help to develop them further, and identify those who are not good and remove them. But the issue of the development is continuous. It is ongoing. Our children and the world around our children are changing so fast, it's unbelievable. Our teachers need to be not just keeping up with this, they need to be ahead of that game. So 5 days per week. My view, one of those days for a teacher should be study, research, and planning. So teachers should work a 4-day week and have 20% of their time to prepare, not to mark, but purely to prepare, to be at the top of their game. We need to look at other industries and what we do with the people who are at the top of their game. I'll tell you what we don't do. We don't get them to work 60, 70 hours per week and mark at weekends and then worry about the inspectors coming in on a Monday and all that kind of stuff. So we need to enable our teachers to become brilliant as well and to remain brilliant. And that's going to cost money, because one of the big mistakes that the Western world is making, certainly the UK and certainly England is making, that it is aspiring as a country to have the highest educational standards and the best teachers, and it wants to pay for that. So Scandinavian-style education and schooling, and it wants to pay for that with American levels of taxation. No calculator can make that work. So if we value as a society and as a country the education and schooling of our children, then we need to pay for what we value, not as a one-off, but continually. And I would say if the government in this country were to turn around tomorrow and say, we need to put 5 pence per pound income tax in order to get all of this right, I'll pay.
I think many people would pay.
Yeah. And so I think we need to really, as a society, also push for this. But we need to also, as parents, work with teachers so that there's, and sometimes against schools. So the schools that say, we've got small class sizes, somebody needs to turn around and go, so what? My school has got big class sizes, but I've got 1 adult for every 7 children. I win. Stop the kidology as part of the PR as well. Right? We need to have a proper grown-up discussion about where this thing should be going. And schools cannot have that discussion on their own. And parents cannot write off their responsibility because they pay the schools to educate their children. This is a collective exercise.
I like it. Let's stick on that topic of parents, because parents are what drive, especially, we're in the Middle East. My kids go to private school. Majority of the expatriate community, their children go to private school. And given parental concerns about class sizes, because it definitely is something people talk about. I was talking to Georgia Tully on Dubai Eye the other day about class sizes and about what's going on there. And I was saying, bigger does not necessarily mean bad. So we were together on that, Ger, even though, you were all the way in the UK. But given parents are the ones who are pushing class sizes, and they're kind of trying to renegade from their responsibilities a little bit as parents, how can schools better communicate the benefits of larger class sizes and the multifaceted approach to a quality education to parents?
Communicate is an interesting word, isn't it? And I think I see it globally. The communication between parents and schools, communication is now defined as a message from one to the other.
Mm.
So perhaps we should change the word communicate with the word dialogue. Yeah? So how many schools have actually had, let's organize it. Okay, I'm proposing it now. I'll fly out to the Middle East. We'll bring another couple of people and we'll have a roadshow. And we'll go to schools and we'll invite parents to come along and we'll thrash it out. Yeah, there are everybody behaves themselves, nobody's disrespectful. And actually what we'll do is we'll put a picture of a child on a big screen and say, today we're here to make that work at its best.
Mm.
Okay, so what are we going to suggest? And then the parents will have their say, the teachers and the non-teaching staff and all sorts of other people. Let's do it. Right? Shall we do it? Because I think it would be an excellent thing. Because I think we just need to be braver in our decision-making, collective decision-making for the greater good being the child. Collective decision-making is lively. No, well, let's make it lively then. Let's just have, rather than there's a group over there and all they do is sit on the fence and moan, the parents, right? There's a group over there, the schools, that say, we just leave us to it, we're the experts. And there's a group of little people in the middle who are kind of being torn a little bit, right? So it would be easy. Let's go and, right? So that's the next thing we're doing, Lisa. We're setting something up and we're getting going, right?
Yeah, we need to.
Yeah.
Because they do sell it though, Ger. And what happens is parents get really offended when the class size increases because the communication is that one way, the school says we will provide your child with smaller class sizes, but they never talk about the quality of a holistic approach to education.
So we need to change the narrative. And incidentally, I think, schools say these things that schools are not the bad guys in this either. There are reasons for that too, right? And sometimes there may be economic reasons as opposed to educational reasons. So maybe when we do the road show, the other people we need in the room are the school owners.
Mm.
Yeah, because everybody needs to be there, really. And we need the young people there, by the way, because we can't just talk about them without them being in the room. So, but no, I'm with you on this. So it's a difficult thing, but what we're not going to solve the issue by just staying in our own boxes and kind of shouting at each other a bit and passing on messages. We're going to need to be quite grown up about this. And I certainly know enough people in the Middle East in the senior kind of educational positions, be it at KHDA or wherever else, who I think would take part in such a debate. But we need to change the narrative. We need to change the narrative from the numbers game to the quality game, from the mass game to the individual.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we overcomplicate things. We need to keep things simple because actually when you unpack it like that, it doesn't sound very hard at all. But when we are starting to serve our own self-interests as opposed to serving the greater good, which is the child, then we get into trouble.
So if we go back to your magical number of 1 to 12...
Don't quote me on this. I said...
They're coming for you, Ger. They're coming for you. I'm telling you. Listen,
they'd be very welcome.
They're coming for you, mate. But if we go for that, just hypothetically, right?
Okay.
It therefore means that every class of 24 or above, so over 24, should have a third adult.
Yes.
What does this then mean in the atmosphere we're now in, where there's such a shortage of quality teachers? Where will they come from, these adults?
One, we're back to this thing about respect and remuneration, etc. Right? So that on one side. There needs to be an intensive program. There have been examples in the past, some very successful, some less so, whereby you speed up the recruitment of teachers. So if you sat down with an X number of youngsters and you painted a picture that was really quite brilliant in professional terms and in lifestyle terms, you would soon grow those numbers. None of those solutions are instant, because The problems weren't created instantly either. This is part of a process, okay? But we can set ourselves reasonable targets. And if we work with government and those in charge who are prepared to put their money where their mouth is and are prepared to recognize that we're going to get some of this wrong because everybody's human and that the end game is a longer term thing, then we will get there. If you begin to paint the picture of come and teach with us, you're going to get 1 day per week whereby you have your own quality time to make the other 4 days absolutely amazing. If you work for us for a number of years, we will arrange professional sabbaticals so that you can go to other countries and witness and learn how the profession lives there. So you can come back and make us richer and better. If those are the kind of cultural things that we develop, of course it will work, just not quite tomorrow, right? Give us a couple of days or years.
Give us a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's going to be such a cultural shift. I mean, we host conferences and seminars, and it's so hard to even get the teachers out.
And I think there's something else, right? And I want to bring this up, right? Because there is the issue of private ownership of schools. And in the end of the day, the companies that own the schools, they are for-profit organizations. Okay? So we need to, every time as a parent, if I could give you one bit of advice as a parent, if you're listening into this, every time you don't like something or you disagree with something, as part of a debate, as part of a dialogue, not as part of messaging, ask the question whether the decision that is being made is an economic decision or an educational decision. Yeah. And actually what we will find is that in a number of cases globally, what is being dressed up as an educational decision by governments is more often than not an economic decision. And when I hear the words economies of scale used in connection with children, I get nervous.
Me too.
Yeah? So ask the question, is this decision economic or is this decision an educational decision? I was once asked on a forum by the then Secretary of State for Education here in the UK what I thought the optimum school size was. And my answer was, my optimum school size is the school where every member of staff knows the name of every child. That's my optimum school size. The economists were falling off their chairs at the back of the room, right? But you're asking me an educational question, I'll give you an educational answer. And incidentally, in that school, I would have classes of 30. Well, fine, I would be perfectly happy with it.
But I think as you had the number of adults.
You have to have the educational agenda needs to be at the forefront. And ultimately, what will happen in terms of the ownership of schools, the private ownership of schools, and that for-profit agenda, over time, what will happen is that the best schools, educationally, will become the most profitable schools financially. And I don't mean by grades. I mean, there are different measures. I want my children to be happy at school. I want them to be educated as well as school. I want them to be global citizens. I want them to be kind, respectful people. When schools begin to do that bit, then the best schools will be the most profitable. It'll take time, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we will. And I think a lot of parents are looking at that now. They're thinking, what do I really want? Do I want a factory? Do I want to send my child to a factory where they'll be manufactured for grades? Or do I want to send my child to a school where they'll come out as a whole human, happy, healthy, and, thriving human being?
And will our children be the leaders that undo the mess that we have made of the world? We need approximately 20 million Greta Thunbergs in some shape or form. People, not numbers.
True. I can't have you on the podcast without, taking time to pontificate and really kind of look ahead. Hybrid schooling, where do you see that in the mix?
It's part and parcel of, the issue about the environment? Environment is the third teacher. It's part and parcel of that. And hybrid, incidentally, is an interesting thing. I'm talking to a number of people now in a kind of advisory role about what I call, in my head, hybrid 2.0. So at the moment, hybrid is either or, isn't it? It's a bit like a car, isn't it? I've got a car and I'm switching to electric and then I'm switching back to petrol. But at no point does it use both at the same time. So hybrid schooling is the same, isn't it? I'm either online or I'm in it. Well, I want to be both at the same time. So I'm working with some people on developing, whether it'll be an app or whatever, I don't know yet. But it is something about, let's just imagine that we get youngsters. And the intelligence, the artificial intelligence behind it all, detects that this young woman called Lisa, who's doing her GCSEs, is particularly interested in flowers and nature. There's a real aptitude for it, a real interest. What the next bit of hybrid learning there needs to be is that Lisa keeps getting messages saying, did you know that there is a Van Gogh exhibition on in Abu Dhabi and it features flowers? So that we create technology that becomes the driver of diverse learning. That in my book will become hybrid 2.0, whereby rather than having it as a resource either or, it becomes a catalyst for more.
Yeah, I like the idea of merging the two. So you are not just online or offline, but you're harmoniously going in between both worlds. I like that.
And it's what the young people are already doing. We need to watch the behavior of our children. So my 18-year-old daughter doing her A-levels this year, she'll be up in her room. There's a laptop, there's an iPad. Sorry, I'm showing my age here. There is a phone, and there is her desk and herself, right? So she's there, but she's talking to her mates at the same time. So they're doing it together, right? And sometimes the teacher might join in. So if our youngsters are working like that already, if their learning has already kind of manifesting itself in that way, why are we not responding to that? Just like I believe, incidentally, and I've suggested this on a number of occasions, that my daughter should be paid by her school to teach younger children. Because my daughter's much better at TikToking and Instagramming than their teachers will ever be. Their teachers will be much better at content and safety than my daughter is. But if we want the best, then we must not ignore the skills that our young people already have. Yeah, so this needs to be up for grabs. We need to be much more open-minded. At the moment, we're all in boxes, and we need to just unbox ourselves.
Wow. This is why I ask these questions, because I get such rich insight. All right, last question, Ger. Where is it all going? AI, the whole shebang. Where is it going? Where do you think it's all going?
Well, one, I think we need to welcome AI, right? There's all these one of the things, what is that saying that I'll come up with it, I'll find it in a minute. There's something about people don't go to negative people. That's it. Don't listen to negative people because they will find a problem for every solution, right? And so I think we just need to steer away from that kind of stuff. I'm really optimistic about it. I think AI, the whole technology thing, can present our young people and our teachers with awe and wonder, with better knowledge, with greater insights, with better opportunities to personalize. If equity is the first thing we think about, equity across the piece, equity in terms of ability, in terms of socioeconomic context. There were schools in the United Kingdom, 7th richest economy in the world, during COVID, where 35% of children did not have internet access at home. So there is also the danger that technology will highlight even more and widen the gap between have and have not equals can and cannot. I'm acutely optimistic. But in the end, you see AI and calculators and there's a fountain pen. This at one point was technology. From the feather to this, amazing, right? But only if we equip the people and respect the people who are involved in the education of our children as they should be. If we do not invest in all sorts of ways, emotionally as well as financially, of course, in the teaching professions, the discussion about technology is pointless because it will never quite work as well as it should. So stop worrying about the technology bit, right? Worry about your teachers. Look after them. Make them better. Help them make themselves better. And then the technology bit will be incredible. I want to end on a story. I was speaking at a conference fairly recently, and I was talking to people about AI, and there's a lot of people are kind of worried about the AI bit, aren't they? And oh my God, and there's all sorts of bad people. Yeah, there will be, and we'll deal with it, right? We'll have some AI police or whatever it'll be, and it'll get dealt with. The question for me was, though, and I said to people, I'm talking to an organization about this. So I want to invite 11 people for coffee in my favorite cafe. And there's two things that those 11 people have in common. One is they're all dead, and two is I like and respect them all. And I think that they will get on together. So my people are Johan Cruyff, the very famous Dutch footballer and manager, the guru of leadership in sport. Albert Einstein, Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa, Christa Wolf, the East German author, Umberto Eco, Anne Frank, and so I go. Yeah, my 11. AI, and my favorite cafe is the Cafe Florian in the Piazza San Marco in Venice. And AI can produce that image. AI can produce an image where I sit with my 11 guests in the Piazza San Marco in Venice. AI can also start to suggest what the discussion might be like, because it can research each of those people. And eventually, AI will be able to voice some of those. As a history lesson, okay, that's what AI can offer us. Who wouldn't want to go to school? Never mind the class size. I just want to be there, right? And that's it.
Brilliant. That is brilliant. Ger, it's been fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I'll see you on the roadshow.
For sure. No, listen, if that can be arranged and we can have that adult rumble, no foolishness, really thrash some of these things out, I'm up for it. 100%.
I'm serious. And I think your organization is an ideal, neutral organization to be the catalyst.
Yeah. Totally.
And I know there are enough people within those school groups like GEMS and others. I know Sherborne in Qatar, those people, they'll be up for that.
Yeah.
I just think we should do it.
It needs to be done because there's a lot of misinformation and misgivings around that. Yeah. Thank you for being on the podcast again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Teach Middle East podcast. Visit our website, teachmiddleeast.com, and follow us on social media. The links are in the show notes.